Hey guys, welcome back to DCS World. I'm Spudknocker, as always. And today we're here in the cockpit of the F-16C Fighting Falcon to continue our series on the bare bones basics of landing jets here in DCS World. Now, of course, as you guys know, landing is one of the most difficult skills to pick up and learn, whether you're in a simulator like DCS World, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, or you're landing a real aircraft in real life. That, of course, goes for any aircraft, a Cessna 172, a Boeing 737, or in our case here, an F-16C Fighting Falcon. Now, a lot of you guys like to question me on why I call it the Fighting Falcon instead of the Viper, and both are equally valid, but I do like the imagery of a flying falcon better than a snake on the ground, so that's just a personal preference on my part. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop in the cockpit of our F-16 and get started with this bare bones basics landing the F-16 tutorial. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and bring our jet back around to the right hand side. We've got some wind up here at the higher flight levels above 10,000 feet. And we're coming in for a landing at Nellis Air Force Base here in Las Vegas. We of course have a very cool aggressor paint scheme on our F-16 that actually works pretty darn well with blending us into the terrain here. And just like in our Hornet video that we went over last time, we're also going to go ahead and pause the simulation here and open the F10 map and come up with a plan for how we're actually going to execute the approach into Nellis Air Force Base and land on one of the runways. So like I said, let's go ahead and open up that F10 map, and we'll go ahead and zoom out away from our F-16C Block 50, and we'll come around and see what is going on with the situation here at Nellis Air Force Base. So we're currently flying on a heading of about, I think it's about 260 degrees-ish. We're flying out this way towards this dry lake area right here that passes through a highway. And we're going to go ahead and land on runway 21 right. And of course, as we know from the last video, runway numbers correspond to their headings. So this runway runs at about a heading of 210 degrees. You guys can of course check that by using your ruler tool on the F10 map and actually making a line down the center of the runway. And it looks like, yeah, we're really darn close to 210 degrees. So about 219 degrees there. Runway numbers are not always absolutely perfectly on the headings. They're usually rounded a little bit to either make things a little bit easier for pilots looking at the runway numbers, or if there are other runways in the area at different airports that may have headings that are very, very similar and very close. So keep in mind that that is not a perfect rule that runway numbers correspond to their headings. They can be a little bit off, but they're good enough for a visual approach and landing on that runway. So let's go ahead and zoom on out. And what is something that's a little bit different here than our setup that we had on the Persian Gulf map for the bare bones landing tutorial in the F-18C is the fact that we're here at Nellis Air Force Base. And the airport elevation here is quite high. If you look up in the top left of the screen, this will be at the top left of all of your F10 maps here in DCS World. You guys can see either a elevation as well as some coordinates here, and that is wherever your mouse is located on the map and on the screen. And you can see that our airport elevation here is up at about 1,850 feet MSL. So it's really, really important that if your jet is equipped with a radar altimeter, you definitely want to use it when landing at higher elevation airports to see exactly how high you are above the runway and the touchdown zone without having to do some mental math to figure out exactly how high you are if you're just looking at your barometric altimeter. Jets like the F-18, F-14, and really all modern fighter jets are going to have that. I believe even going back to the F-86, and F-86 even has a radio altimeter as well. So coming up with our actual plan of how we're going to fly this approach and how we're actually going to land at Nellis Air Force Base. Because we're diligent pilots and we're always looking at maps and always coming up with a plan as to how we're going to actually execute everything we do to stay ahead of the jet and stay ahead of everything that's coming at us very, very quickly, we're going to go ahead and continue flying on our heading over the small Echo Bay Airport out towards this dry lake area over here and out towards this highway. As we start to approach this highway right here, we're going to start to make a left-hand turn, about a 60-degree-ish left-hand turn, coming around to get ourselves lined up with our runway here. Now, a lot of new pilots, both in real life and in DCS World, who are just picking up simulators for the first time, or Microsoft Flight Simulator, if you've come over from that community to take a look at DCS video, and this is what you've decided on. It's very hard to understand and learn the geometry of how you're supposed to fly to get yourself lined up on the course lines and on the correct headings at the correct places in order to actually get you lined up on the runway, or line up getting to a navigational aid, or lined up getting to the right place to drop your bombs on a target, all this kind of stuff. But this is why I'm kind of making these videos to help you guys kind of find and realize the kind of geometry and how you're supposed to fly the aircraft to get you lined up to different spots. So, like I said, we're going to go ahead and fly towards this highway over here. Now, highways are fantastic navigational points. They are concrete compasses. You know, they run across the land. They're usually very easy to see from pretty high up. And so we'll hit this highway here, and we'll make that left-hand about 60-degree turn coming down to line us up on the runway, coming down, and we'll try to land on this right-hand runway here. Now, the wind that we have set up in this mission is bringing us the wind right down the runway, and it's going to give us a good headwind to assist with our landing. So with that kind of plan in mind, let's go ahead and hop into our cockpit of our F-16 and continue on through the approach and landing. So we'll go ahead and unpause the simulation here, and we're back in our cockpit, and we've got our lights turned on here. It's a pretty early morning here on the Nevada map, so the sun is just barely up over the horizon. And we'll go ahead and continue on. First thing, of course, we want to do is make sure that we have our master arm turned off. We're going to go ahead and turn off our countermeasures just to make sure that we don't accidentally FOD the runway or the approach to the runway with any accidentally dropped flares or chaff. And as we approach our lineup point, which is going to be that highway that's just past these very low little ridge of hills here, we're going to start a gentle descent coming down. So let's go ahead and turn off our autopilot. We'll bank the aircraft to the right a little bit just to bring ourselves down to that waypoint that we placed on or near that highway. Now keep in mind, guys, that the F-16 is a lot slipperier than the F-18C Hornet. The jet likes to go very, very fast, and so when you're approaching an area to make a landing at an airport, whether it's on the Nevada map or any other map, you always want to make sure you're retarding those throttles a little bit early. So we'll go ahead and get our controls indicator up here for you guys so you can see exactly what my controls are doing in my hands, my rudders, my throttle, and my stick. And we'll go ahead and copy and paste that up into the left-hand corner of the screen in a larger format for you guys to see that as well. Also, additionally, we're going to go ahead and hit the escape key and look at the adjust controls menu and take a look at two keybinds that are going to be absolutely key for helping you guys land the F-16 effectively. And that is going to be the seat adjustment switch up and down. Now, the reason why we need to use these is because the F-16 has such a high angle of attack when you're coming down to actually land on the runway, and you're going to also be simultaneously bringing in more and more back pressure to continue to keep that nose up and get that good aero braking. It's going to be very, very hard to continue to see the runway and the area out in front of us as we're rolling down the runway, or even when we're on approach to that runway. So it's very, very important to actually move your seat up so that way you can see the area out in front of your jet. For those of you who have flown the Mirage 2000 at DCS World, that will be very, very familiar, and you have to do the exact same thing in that jet as well. Also, another major difference between the F-16 and the F-18C Hornet is the fact that the flaps in the F-16 are actually scheduled to come down with the gear when we bring the gear down. And if we look over here to our left, we can see the Las Vegas Strip, and of course we can see the Motor Speedway and Nellis Air Force Base, the base we're going to actually make our landing. And we can see ye olde concrete compass running along right here, this highway running along just behind this ridge, and we're going to start our turn around this ridge and continue on following that highway right into Nellis Air Force Base. Probably need to descend a little bit more. In the F-16, when you're just starting out, I really highly recommend that you practice a bunch of straight-in approaches to land before you actually start doing overhead brakes to land. So we'll go ahead and just make a gentle left-hand turn. The reason for this is the F-16 is just a lot more difficult to actually fly in that overhead pattern and that overhead brake than the F-18C is. Looks like I may have overshot the runway just slightly, but we'll go ahead and bring it back around. As you can see, this little mountain ridge along with that highway is a very good visual landmark to actually make your turn to get lined up with the runway. And I recommend getting your velocity vector onto your touchdown point as early as possible and as far out as possible to actually help reduce your descent gradient to make for a much softer landing for a nice straight-in approach. We're also going to reduce the brightness of our HUD using the symbology brightness knob, so that way we can still see the runway behind our velocity vector without blanking out the runway with our own HUD symbology. Now we're going to start to bring out the speed brakes, and you can look over your shoulder just to make sure they're out if you're not using those auditory cues of hearing the little roaring sound of those speed brakes popping out. At this point, we're nice and lined up with the runway. We know the wind is coming right down the pipe for us, so we're going to go ahead and start to slow the airplane down. And we'll go ahead and bring down the gear. And we can see that balloon caused by the flaps coming down as the gear is coming down. At this point, we're going to now start to bring up that nose up trim to try and get our velocity vector inside of our E bracket for the correct angle of attack for landing. We're going to start to bring in some more throttle. Now we're in that region of reverse command, where we're now using our throttle for altitude, using our throttle to bring our velocity vector back up to the runway, and our trim and stick for airspeed. Now it doesn't translate to a simulator of a fighter jet quite as easily as you can see it in, say, flying around a Cessna in real life or flying a Cessna in Flight Simulator 2020, but the principle is there. It just requires using a lot of throttle, more throttle than you would imagine, to keep the aircraft on course for that good landing. And as our angle of attack increases, we're bringing the seat up, so that way we can still see the symbology on the HUD, as well as being able to see the area out in front of our nose, so that way we can make that good landing. A little bit too much throttle there. You can see just how gentle I am on the throttle. And if you're comparing this video to that in the F-18, you can see I have a lot less throttle than when I have the F-18 on final approach. And the reason is that single GE F-110 in the very light airframe that is the F-16 gives a heck of a lot of performance. Seeing a little bit of bumpiness from changing the wind direction slightly as we reduce our altitude. And we can see that radar altimeter starting to tick down, about 700 feet now, probably a little bit high. I'd like to reduce my descent gradient just slightly to give for a shallower glide slope. The more gentle you can touch down the F-16, absolutely the better it is. A lot of pilots tend to smash the gear in the F-16 in DCS when they first are starting to land it, or they run off the end of the runway because they don't keep that nose up for that good aerobraking to help slow the plane down. Another tip here with the F-16 on landing is I like to concentrate more on the angle of attack for the final approach than I do the airspeed. Whereas in the F-18, airspeed is key, and the F-16, it's all about the angle of attack for the landing. A little bit of extra power there to reduce. We're going to start to flare, bring the power to idle. Just let it gently settle out. There we go, we're touched down. We're going to try and keep that nose up. Pulling back, pulling back, pulling back. Using our rudder pedals to make sure we stay on the center line. And we're just using that F-16 as a big air brake. Now as the nose comes down, you can see our seat is way too high. We can't even see the HUD symbology anymore, but that's okay. We don't need it anyway since we're on the deck, and we're just going to go ahead and bring our brakes into play. We'll turn on our nose wheel steering, and we'll go ahead and get off the runway. We'll go ahead and reduce the height of our seat. And nice. Got off here at Bravo. And we'll go ahead and taxi via Foxtrot back to the aggressor ramp. So I hope that this video is helpful for you guys. it definitely took me quite a while to figure out exactly how to land the F-16, and I'm sure there are others out there that are much better at it than I am, but this video should help you guys at least get the very, very basics down of how to land the F-16, because I know a lot of guys coming into DCS World for the first time get super frustrated because they feel like they're landing appropriately, but they end up breaking their jet somehow, landing too harshly, going off the end of the runway because they're not getting in the aerobraking. And this applies to all airplanes, whether it's the F-16, the F-18, the F-14, or any other jet in DCS World. Landing is, of course, the hardest thing to get right. So if you guys like this video and want to see more, please let me know in the comments section, and any other jets you guys want to see me land and give you guys some tips on, any other parts of landing that you guys want to see tips on, or if you want to see some overhead brake tutorials or anything of that nature, please let me know in the comments section. Oh, of course, crosswinds. I do have a crosswind video coming up for you guys, so stay tuned for that as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys are staying healthy and staying safe and having a great holiday season. Thanks a lot, guys.